Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyaus Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Sarvastaratu durgani sarvo bhadrani pashyatu. Sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good. And may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Maheti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We begin today on verse number 8. Arannyor nihito jata veda garbha iva subhruto garbhinebhihi dive dive idyo jagravadbhihi havishmadbhihi manushebhihi agnihi etat vai tat. Like the fetus well preserved by the pregnant mother, the omniscient Agni, lodged in the fire sticks, is worshipped day after day by the awakened men and the sacrificial offerers. This is verily that. So what Yama is pointing out here is that the same truth, the same spirit, the same divinity pervades the entire creation. Because sometimes we make a distinction between the path of knowledge, the path of devotion, the path of karma. Sometimes people think that rituals are either the preliminaries, non-essential preliminaries, which can easily be dispensed with, or it's for superstitious people, and so on. So there are various ideas people have about the role of rituals and about the path of meditation or the path of love for God. So we tend to create a hierarchy. Sometimes in the path of devotion, they tend to downgrade the role of knowledge or reason, elevating love as a higher expression. In the path of knowledge, they sometimes say, oh, this sentimentality and knowledge is the real thing. And then there are these strong ritualists who feel that all these abstractions about love, knowledge don't really matter. What really matters is the actual doing of things, either in terms of service to the world or to the service, a ritual, a religious service. So there are all these different opinions. What this verse points out is, whichever way people are trying to seek the truth, if that is done with a sincere heart, if that is done with a genuine quest to know the reality, then that same reality is present in all of those efforts as well as the goal that is reached by each of these ways. So it's our ignorance that tends to elevate one thing above the other. Now, which does not mean that we need to understand all of them properly. It doesn't also mean that we need to find all of them relevant to us. It's not necessary. It's quite okay if some people find the path of knowledge, of philosophy, to be something that truly resonates with their heart. That's fine. Or if some people feel, no, my primary way, my primary mode of approaching God is through devotion, through bhakti. Fine. Or some people say, mine is through trying to do everything that I do unselfishly. Or through puja, or through ritual. That's fine also. What is most important is that our motives are pure, that we know whatever we are doing with a sincere heart. We're doing with a genuine hunger for that truth. Sri Ramakrishna goes to the extent of saying that even if we take a wrong turn, even if we go on a detour or go on a completely different direction, if we are sincere, and if our hunger for truth is genuine, circumstances will rearrange themselves in such a way that somebody will come and point out to us, hey, that's not the way, go this way. So from our side, we have to make sure that we are completely sincere. There is a beautiful phrase in Bengali which Sri Ramakrishna used to employ quite often, which literally translated into English would mean there should be no theft in the chamber of the mind. That's how it gets translated often. What it really means is that our thoughts, our words, and our actions must be in harmony. But theft in the chamber of the mind means that my mind is thinking something else, but I'm pretending that if that thing is something not I'm proud of, if I'm not, don't think it's wholesome enough, I pretend as if it's not there. I pretend as if there is something else going on. Now, a life of pretension, a life of trying to appear different than who we are, is not an authentic life. Now, that doesn't mean that if there's something wrong, we need to go and publicize to the whole world what terrible things are going on in our heads all the time. That doesn't mean putting all your autobiography in your Facebook or everything to social media. And that's not the idea. The idea is whatever is going on within me, to not be in denial of it. If I find that there are things in my life that I'm proud of, that's great. I can be happy about the positive things in my mind. But I can also be aware that there are these weakening or destructive or harmful ideas and concepts and thoughts in my mind. Even to acknowledge that is the first step. It's like they say that if I have to be cured of my illness, the first step is to acknowledge that I'm ill. Because there are a lot of people who are ill but are in denial about it. If I'm in denial about it, then sometimes even medication won't work, they say. So first thing is to acceptance. But acceptance of ourselves as we are includes recognizing one's strengths and weaknesses. If we can do that, it's not that easy to look at oneself objectively. In fact, it's not that easy to look at, it might be easy to look at others objectively, but our judgment of others is also filtered, it's biased, it's colored by our own prejudices and biases, and that's how we judge everyone and everything in the world. Oftentimes, the yardsticks with which we judge ourselves is sometimes different from the way we judge others. So if we can judge ourselves as objectively as possible, as much as it is possible to do it without any biases and prejudices, that's the very important step in spiritual life. To know ourselves as we are at this very moment, with all the strengths and the weaknesses. Once that is done, then it becomes very easy. Because going forward in life then, now that I have identified what my strengths are, I need to make sure that everything that I do and say and think preserves my strengths. Because nothing is permanent. What are my strong points can be lost if I don't preserve them. And whatever weaknesses I have identified in myself, I need to then ask myself, what do I need to do? What things in my life need to change in order for me to get over those weaknesses? And if the list is long and big, which it is likely to be, it can be sometimes very daunting. Then it's even helpful, I can say, for the next 6 months, while I need to work on all of my weaknesses, I'm going to focus on this one and do it. In that book, The Imitation of Christ by Thomas A. Kempis, he mentions in one place that if we have identified these weaknesses in us, and if we choose, he's very generous in that way, he says that if we choose to remove even one weakness per year, the likelihood of finding ourselves to being better human beings in a few years is much more. But it has to be done consciously. So we cannot, it's a little bit like if I am sick, but I am in denial about it, and I feel if I just ignore it, it will go away by itself. Sometimes it might, if it's not like a major illness. It's not good to be too obsessive about every little change that is occurring within us also. So some things need to be ignored, but some things will not go away by simply my denying it, by simply pretending as if it is not there. So that's true with our weaknesses also. Just because I don't think about them doesn't mean that they'll go away. So I need to become conscious and remove them. And that's what is being pointed out here. So in the ancient days, Agni, for the sacrificial fire in the Vedic rituals, and nowadays, of course, when we light the fire here, we have got all different ways of lighting fire here. But those are modern ways. But in ancient times, especially these Vedic rituals, they didn't use matchsticks. They didn't have any other kind of lighters. They just used two sticks, special sticks, and they were called aranis. And so there's a Uttararani and Adhararani, two sticks. And it's just through, sometimes you might have seen in some fiction or something like that, in the how people started fire in, say, in the Stone Age or in the earlier prehistoric days, essentially through friction. So these two sticks they rub, and they'll have this something very dry and combustible, which can catch fire quickly. So the sparks emerging from that friction then will light that fire. And so what is being said here is, like the fetus well preserved by the pregnant mother. Now these fire, the fire lodged in these fire sticks is worshipped day after day by the awakened men and the sacrificial offerer. The sacrificial offerers are the ritualists. Awakened men are the jnanis, the people who follow the path of knowledge. So let's look at these two different kinds of fires, the external fire and the internal fire. Now in the Vedic period, every household was supposed to preserve certain fires. They were like sacred fires. Some of these old names in the Vedas, Agnihotra, there's a lot of Agni coming there. And so I don't want to go into the details because I haven't studied it deeply myself. All that I know is that there were these special kind of fires in very orthodox families today, but in most families in the Vedic time in the Indian subcontinent, they had these fires. So not every fire could be used for everything. So there was this one particular fire which was used for daily worship. So you know, when we do worship here, we have one source of fire and then I light the incense sticks from that and so on. So there was this one source of fire, essentially it was an oil lamp. That's essentially that fire. So that one fire will be used for the daily worship and the upasana that is done by these families. And that fire has to be preserved. It's not that at the end of the worship you put it out and next day light it again. No shortage of oil in Vedic times. So that fire had to be kept burning all the time. Then there was another fire. That fire had to be kept burning in a family and remained oftentimes for generations, because that was a fire to be used whenever there is a death in the family. So for the cremation, they will take that one specific fire. Everyone who died in that family, that fire will be lighted by that particular fire. So there were these 2 or 3 other more fires. So each fire was used for a specific purpose, and the family had to preserve it, make sure that it never goes out. And that's why the example given here is of the fetus well preserved by the pregnant mother. We know that during pregnancy, the mother-to-be has to be very careful. Any kind of a carelessness would hurt the fetus. And therefore, just that is the example given here. So therefore, in the same care and love and affection that a mother bestows on the baby which is to be born, these families bestowed that same care and love and nourishment for that fire. You have to constantly make sure it never ran out of oil, that wasn't put off by breeze, it was kept in a safe place, and so on. The internal fire. Now the jnanis, the path of knowledge, there may not be an external fire through a ritual, but then there is the inner fire. And first of all, that is the fire of it begins by, it's often called the fire of dispassion, fire for turning away from the material world. In other words, every time the mind seems to get immersed in the perishable things of the world, all those, that way of thinking, one puts into that inner fire and reduces it to ashes. So whatever the ritualist does externally, in an external fire, it's not just about just chanting of some mantras and throwing some things in that fire. That's only an external action. But the mantras that are chanted, if one carries out the ritual in exactly the way it ought to be done, understanding the full meaning of it, then one knows that it's not simply a ritual, that there is a higher, deeper reality behind it. To give you a simple example, one of the parts of a ritual, or a ritual is really a collection of smaller things that you do. So you can say this entire ritual practice is a part of several small rituals in that practice. So one of the things that is done in the puja, for instance, that we do is the seed mantra for fire, Agni. It's called the Ram. And so one takes a little bit of water in the palm of one's hand or in the spoon and sprinkles it all around while uttering that bija called Rang. That is invoking that seed mantra related with fire. Now the origin of that is easy to understand, because in the olden days when they did these Vedic rituals, they're often done, it wasn't a developed city like this, it was a wooded area, it was jungle. And oftentimes these Vedic rituals lasted for a long time. So they didn't want any interruptions or obstructions during the ritual. So what they did actually was, wherever that big sacrifice or ritual was going to be done, they lit fires all around, so that any wild creatures or animals wouldn't come and disturb the ritual. So they would remain protected within that. And then the ritual could go on undisturbed. So that thing which they actually did in Vedic times then eventually became ritualized, a part of the ritual itself, that even though there were no wild animals to come, but all these wild thoughts can come and disturb me. And so this remnant of that ancient practice was, you take this little bit of water, invoke Agni, fire, and imagine a wall of fire around you, so that you are protected within that enclosure, and then you're free to meditate, to worship, and to pray. And so whoever does that worship often employs this particular practice. When we read Ramakrishna's life, he was doing a ritualistic worship as well. So when he used to do that, he describes it, that when he would take this water and throw it around, he would actually able to see in his mind a big, huge wall of fire around him. Now that is what I mean. Even doing a ritual in exactly the way it should be done, it's not simply just some actions and some utterings of some mantras, that it has a deeper reality. So that external fire which we use in puja, the jnanis use that internal fire. It could be the fire of dispassion, the fire of detachment. It could be the fire of love for God, that great longing for moksha. We know that when we feel passionate about something, we feel energized by something, animated by something. It's almost like a fire burning. We feel that great energy within us. So that is the energy that jnanis have within. And oftentimes, the presence of that spirit, the presence of the divine, is not oftentimes seen in terms of fire, but often in terms of light. And we know fire and light go together. There's a big fire, there's a big flame, there is also light. So the light of God in our heart. Now that's not a fire that burns, It's a fire that suits us. It's a fire, it's the light that calms us, light that brings us peace and understanding. Now, those on the path of knowledge have to preserve that fire, that light as well, as carefully as the ritualists have to preserve that external fire. As spiritual seekers, the fire of spiritual aspiration has to be preserved also. Think about as far back as you can go in your own life, when that first stirring in our heart occurred about, I need to take spiritual life more seriously. I need to meditate. I need to pray. I need to do this. So that was the lighting in some ways, the fire of spiritual aspiration in our heart. That fire has to be preserved also. It's not enough that we start doing some spiritual practice through that lighting of that fire in our heart. But if we are not careful, then that fire can get dimmed, or if you are totally careless, that fire can even go out. We know that this thing can happen when we see there is this waxing and waning of the spiritual earnestness and hunger in our heart. There are times, sometimes days, or sometimes months, when we feel very motivated spiritually. And then there are those dry periods. So these ups and downs that we experience in our life is really that fire in our heart, sometimes being brighter, sometimes getting dimmed. So we need to preserve that fire in our own heart as well. So all of these, the care and nourishment that the ritualists bestow on that external fire, and the care and nourishment that as spiritual seekers we have to bestow on this inner fire of spirituality, in all of those things, the truth is one and the same. It's the Atman. This is verily that. Verse 9. Yatascha udeti suryaha astam yatra cha gacchati tam deva sarve arpitaha tadunatyeti kaschana etadvaitat. That from which the sun rises and into which it merges again, in that are all the gods fixed, and none can verily transcend it. This is verily that. So the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun is a big part of our life as we understand it. If the sun didn't rise and set, there would be no seasons, there would be no day or night. It would be very different. Life would be very different. Who controls and supervises all these cosmic functions? The rising and setting of the sun is just one of the things, but all these astronomical bodies going around, all these, not just these big, massive things happening around us, but even this tiniest of things that are happening around us. Every living creature, small and big, and everything that happens in life, all the laws that govern it, who supervises those laws? That is what is meant by, in that are all the gods fixed. Now gods, although they get personalized and mythologized in many different ways, gods, as Swami Vivekananda liked to see them, was primarily the personifications of the powers of nature. The nature around us does amazing things. The rising and setting of the sun is just one of it. But there is sun, rain, moon, water, all of these functions when we personify them, that who is really doing it? Who sends us rains? From where does wind come? Now, if it's possible to look at all of this as just material things, and we can explain all of this through material laws, how rain falls, or when there is snow, and so on, or the movement of astronomical bodies. And that's the material view, seeing everything as just nothing but a play of atoms and molecules and some chance reactions and so on. And when we see some pattern in all of this, we then call it a law. A law is nothing but seeing some pattern in the way things happen, and based on that pattern to predict how they will behave in future. And when we find that they do indeed behave the way we expected them to behave based on our observation of their pattern in the past, we then say that's the law. Until we find something happens which is an exception, that it doesn't seem to follow the law. And then we look deeper and say, oh, so this something else happened because of which that law had to be then modified. And that's how science, which one good thing about science is that it is willing to correct itself. I mean, a good scientist will, people often say religious people are dogmatic, but there is dogma in science as well. I mean, scientists can be dogmatic as well. But a good scientist would be one who says, this is what we know at present, but I'm willing to recognize the possibility that should we observe something different, which is not in harmony with our present understanding of the material universe, we are going to study it, and if necessary, change our present theory. That would be perfect. So, but those who refuse to do that and say, no, this is how things are, well, that's dogma. So there is this materialistic way of looking at it, everything. Holding everything provisionally, unless and until there is a change that is needed. But the way the Vedic sages looked at this universe was not simply as just a material, just chance, atoms and molecules and protons and electrons and electric charges and chemicals just moving about and doing things at random. They saw everything as filled with life. They saw everything living, brimming. And that prevented them from seeing matter as just a lifeless, dull, insentient entity. Because a materialistic view of life says that at some point during evolution, life emerged. And no one is really sure. It's just like some chance, the circumstances and the materials were just right for life to emerge. That's pretty much where it comes. No one really knows how and why it happened. No one has been able to recreate life. One can try to preserve life. You can't create it. Just the other day, I think some researchers at Yale tried to take some brains out of some dead pigs and pump some blood into it and regenerate it and found some cellular activity in those. That's great. But they had to take it from a dead pig. They couldn't just take some things in a laboratory and do pretty much the same thing and expect some cellular activity. So they had to take some cells, even if they were apparently dead cells, to reactivate them. And so long as we are not really able to create cells ourselves, not just regenerate the already existing cells, we cannot truly say we are creating life. We haven't reached that stage yet. But the way the Vedic sages saw life saw everything was just filled with a real presence. They saw it as the presence of God, the presence of Brahman. And so, all these cosmic functions that occurred, whether it's the rising of the sun, everything that nature did, they saw that it just didn't happen by accident. That there was a conscious presence behind it all. Not necessarily in terms of some God sitting above the clouds, a long bearded gentleman with a stick in hand doing it. Not in that sense. But that there is a deeper conscious reality whose presence is absolutely essential, which animates the world in which we live. And that is what is being pointed out here. In that are all the gods fixed. Now, gods are all these personified powers of nature. Now, internally, now this is externally what we see. Now, internally, oftentimes our senses, the 5 senses of knowledge that we have, are the internal gods. And just as there are these cosmic functions going outside, there are a lot of functions going on inside. Our perception of the world would not occur until these inner gods, the senses, did what they were supposed to do. The function of seeing had a certain job to do. Hearing had a certain job to do. If they do their job in the way they ought to do it, then this inner universe becomes alive, and I'm able to see the world. Similarly, in my dream, I wouldn't be able to see the dream until the senses in my dream are functioning. So if I'm blind in my dream, I may not be blind so the person I see in my dream as myself, if that person is blind, that person won't be able to see the dream world. But I will be able to see that dream, that blind person who is me. It's getting complicated, I know. But the idea is that we need the senses to function the way they do for us to be aware of whatever world we are seeing, waking or dream, or even deep sleep for that matter. Deep sleep, there are no senses, of course. So all of these movements that occur in the external world or the internal world, the laws that govern the external world and the internal world, the instruments that make it possible for me to perceive the external world or whatever is going on in my internal world, all of these are within law. And none of these can transcend that law. And the source, the one who is the controller of that law, by just being present there, not through issuing orders, but just its presence is needed in order for things to happen. That this is verily that. That is the Atman. So we saw in these 2 verses, 8 and 9, that everything that happens within or without is controlled by this one reality. That same reality which ritualists may try to reach through rituals, those on the path of knowledge can reach through the path of knowledge, those on the path of devotion can reach through the path of devotion, but the reality is the one and the same. And the verses that we will study next week will show that we have to keep on seeing that one reality pervading everything. The moment we start seeing differences, all the problems arise from that. And that we will study next week. So you have any thoughts, ideas, questions about what we have seen today, please feel free to ask.
Swamiji, what is the role of the company that we keep, the media that we consume, in keeping that fire alive?
I think it plays an important role, because through the company that we keep or the media that we consume, we are getting thoughts and ideas within us. And that's the food that enters the mind, either directly or through the senses. And just as our body can get nourished or not depending on the food that we eat, the mind, the inner, the subtle part of our personality can get nourished or not depending on the kind of food that we give. So if I keep good, healthy, positive company, if I consume good, healthy, positive media itself, there are some wonderful things, something very strengthening. So a judicious choice of the books that we read, the friends that we have, the movies that we see, the television programs that we watch, the social media that we consume, if we can do it intelligently and wisely, I think they can be very helpful. But done carelessly, we might be hurt. Just like if you have careless eating habits, we will be hurt.
So, sorry.
Swamiji, it's just a thought. I remember once you told me that we all have a spiritual child inside us, and be a mother of that spiritual child. And if your senses are all in correct path, then only you can protect your spirituality and the child. So it reminds me because you were talking about
Absolutely, that's very true. It's very true. We need to take care of our growing spiritual aspiration. The spirituality and heart is like our own baby. And so every one of us is actually a mother. We have to protect that seed of spirituality growing in our heart. And then only it can become strong. That's very good, yeah.
Swamiji, slightly unrelated, but in this pursuit of spending more time thinking of the spiritual ideal, I find myself thinking of the spiritual ideal. So my mind is not thinking of anything else. I'm unable to really latch on to my true spiritual ideal, but I'm thinking of it. Is that helpful itself, or am I just in a confused meta state?
No, just please explain further. What do you mean thinking about it?
So I will actively tell my mind when I'm doing an activity that I should be thinking of my spiritual ideal.
And that's good. I mean, self-reminders are always good.
But I'm not actually able to think of the spiritual ideal, so I'm thinking of the spiritual ideal. So I'm wondering, though, is that time better spent thinking of productive worldly activities, or is there benefit in shutting out the worldly activities in the feeble attempt to latch on to them?
No, when you think of the spiritual ideal, at some time that thought has to evolve into some action, right? I mean, it's a little bit like, suppose I have to finish some project, and that's weighing on my mind. And I might be always think, I need to finish that project. But reminding myself I need to finish that project should eventually lead to an activity where I actually start doing something to finish that project, right? So it's the same way, exactly the same way. Yeah. Anish?
So Swamiji, in this section, they end with Advaita.
Etadvaitad. This is that.
This is that. So just interesting. It kind of reminds me of the, Tattvamasi, like you are that.
You are that.
But this seems to be saying something a little bit different. This is that. Yeah. So does that mean that that's another way to look at the Atman? look at the Atman as in other things, like this and this and this and this,
Yeah, yeah.
rather than, the other one is saying, looking at it from the subjective perspective.
Yeah. So these are different ways of keeping the mind engaged in that one reality. So it's a little bit like, let's say sometimes in movie making, really making a movie as a big project, there are these specialized tasks people have. And so among the different tasks is, there are some location scouts, for instance. So they have to be there at every, they need to know the story. They need to be on the same page with the director, who is really conceptualizing how the movie is going to unfold. This is even before the shooting has actually started. So a certain person has been given that this is the plot, this is the screenplay, these are the kind of scenes we are going to have. Now, do some location hunting. We need a village. Now, where exactly are we going to shoot? Which village are we going to go to? So now, if someone has that responsibility, so this person, it's not enough for this person to just sit in the room and say, oh, location. You can't do that. So at the same time, this person has a family. He'll be going on weekend vacations or hikes or wherever. But because this person has that story in his mind, every time this person sees a river, says, oh, maybe that particular scene in the movie, we can shoot it here. Or again, the idea is that if something is on the mind, we will start seeing it everywhere. Or similarly, just as location scouts, there are talent hunters, or people who do the castings, for instance. So they know what kind of characters are needed for a certain movie or a theater. So they'll be looking out for talent, and then every person they see, there'll be something at the back of their mind. Oh, maybe this person might be able to do that role. You get the point, right? So similarly, for a Vedanta student would be, if Atman is all that exists, and the more that thought remains dominant in my mind, I can still go about doing the things I need to do in daily life. It doesn't need to that I just sit in one corner thing, Atman. We don't have to do that. We have got a bunch of things to do. We are busy with our duties and responsibilities in life. But even as we go about doing them, because this is lying somewhere in the corner of my heart, always like the ping, 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 some not a sound exactly. But so then every time I see something, I say, oh, there is Atman. So the more I become aware of the Atman dwelling in my own heart, even to begin with, the Atman dwelling in my own heart, every time I see a person, especially the person I'm directly dealing with, it will be helpful to just acknowledge, well, there is Atman in this person's heart too. God is not simply in my heart, God is in this person's heart too. If we are able to remember it, it'll revolutionize our interpersonal relationships. The way we treat other people, the way we speak with other people will become different if we remember there is God in this person's heart. So that's what the idea. So etadvaita, this is that.
So can we use it ourselves as a reminder? So this itself could be a reminder for ourselves, this short 3 words to remind us to do that.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
So Swamiji, just to follow up this discussion, I think you have said that if you can see beyond the name and form of any object, then actually you're seeing the divine.
Mm-hmm.
And this struck me that Swami Vivekananda, I think at some point he was concentrating on a black dot, and his concentration became so intense that then he started experiencing supersensuous truths. That's something is mentioned in his biography.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what he must have experienced.
Absolutely. Name and form cover the divine. So there is nothing but divine within us and around us. but that divine is hidden. What is it that hides the divine? Because only divine exists. Other than that, nothing exists. If God is everywhere, why don't I see God anywhere? Because God is hidden. What is hiding God? Just as the clouds hide the sun, what is hiding God? The clouds are smaller than the sun. That which is hiding God is smaller than God. But clouds are still able to hide the sun. Not totally, but they can hide the sun, most of it. Similarly, God cannot be hidden totally. That's why if God were hidden totally, we wouldn't even know that we exist. So our experience of existence, Sat, knows that God is not hidden totally. But the Chit and Anand is hidden. What hides it is name and form. So here is the chair. I see the chair now. I see the chair because I see a name and I see a certain form. That is why I call it a chair. If I can cultivate the ability to separate out its name and form, that's God. So when you go to the ocean, you are seeing waves. Now if you can, and you say, well, that's a wave, that's a big wave, that's a small wave. Essentially, you're seeing a certain form, you're seeing that that form is moving in a specific way, in a specific form, you call it a wave. But if you look deeply, if you take out the name and form, you just see, it's just the water of the ocean. It's just ocean, right? That's exactly how it is.
So Swamiji, then just to follow the chair example, so we look at the chair, we should focus more on the existence aspect of it. Right?
Well, existence, you know. The moment you say this is a chair,
Right.
the isness, existence of the chair you can see, otherwise you wouldn't even see the chair. The trick is, I will not be able to take the name and form out of the chair while holding on to my own name and form. It just doesn't work that way. So the loosening of the name and form of the chair will occur to the extent the loosening of the name and form occurs in my own heart. So when you say, who is Rajdeep? Again, the moment you think of Rajdeep, you think of a certain person. And there is, of course, the name. So if that hold that my own name and my own form have on my own existence, when that loosens up a little bit, then the other names and forms I see around me will also loosen up. I think the mistakes that most of us tend to make is we cling to our own limited individuality while then trying to remove the individuality of everything and say, oh, this is all God. No, this can't be God. I must first see God in my own heart. To the extent I'm able to see God in my own heart, I'll be able to see God everywhere. So people say charity begins at home. Vedanta says everything begins at home. That's it.
Thank you.
Mind?
So Swamiji, I want to also go back to last week a little bit. I asked you the question and I wanted to, about the fear in the verse 5 or 6.
Yes. Oh, thank you for bringing that.
I wanted, and I thought that I'm starting to get to these terms with, yes, you said that's something which starts from you to then the broader stuff. But that fear of having somebody looking after you is still there as well, right?
Yeah, it's na tato vijugupsate, that comes on verse 5. Yeah, he fears no more thereafter. What it means is this, that any kind of response or reaction, whether it's fear fear is just one of the ways we react. As long as that is there, I cannot feel completely free. fear is, of course, the thing that all of us have experienced in life. There is this very tangible fear that some of us have, fear of snakes, fear of fire, and so on. But there is also a very subtle, invisible fear. We sometimes call it just the anxiety, but it's also, anxiety is a kind of fear in some ways. The fear of death, fear of what is going to happen in the future. If I lack sufficient means, fear of surviving. If I'm not able to pay my bills, how am I going to face my debt? Creditors or debtors? What is it? Debtors, sorry. Yeah. So all of those are very genuine fears that people have experienced in life. But again, it doesn't have to be even those kind of fears. It's like this. The example that I really like very much is, if you are just sitting by yourself in a big room, you are all alone, there is nobody, there are no cameras, and there is no person, and there is no possibility of even anybody being there, you just feel completely free, because you are not being watched, you are not being judged, you are just being yourself. Now let's say someone enters that room, who may be a very close friend of yours. There is nothing to be afraid of that person. That person is not going to hurt you in any way. But just the presence of one other person in the room, that original freedom you felt in just being by yourself, it does get compromised a little bit. Just the presence of other person. That's what is referred to there. Besides the obvious fear that we all have. And that's the idea, na tatra vijugupsate in verse 5. So once we experience that oneness, etadvaitat, we see that one Atman everywhere, then there is nobody else to which I need to react, either through fear or whatever other emotions. And that really is extremely liberating. That's the idea. Yeah. All right, so we'll stop here today. Next week we'll do verse number 10. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu. So we'll continue this study next Wednesday. On Sunday, we have a guest speaker, Father Francis Clooney of Harvard University, who many of you have heard before. He will speak on Easter and human transformation. So while we had an Easter service last Sunday, the part of our Antar Yoga, next Sunday is also Easter in the Orthodox tradition. And so we are very happy that this time we have a chance to mark that day as well. So I encourage you to come for Sunday service for Father Clooney's talk. And our Tuesday and Saturday meditation will also continue as usual. Let's conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.